Near about February of 1849, the association in New York purchased the square-rigged Arkansas and obtained a master, Captain P.W. Shepard, to take charge of the ship. The association delayed several times, as related by the advertisement below. While they attempted to find additional members, their standards were higher than those of the Clampers. For San Francisco and the gold regions was the advertisement. The packet ship Arkansas of 627 tons register, P.W. Shepard, master, now receiving freight and will sail as soon as freighted for California. She is a superior vessel, and her accommodations for passengers are supposedly excellent. The ship is owned by the California Mutual Benefit and Religious Stock or Association, which is formed for persons of religious or good moral character, who take with them a chaplain, a well-qualified physician, a geologist, an assayer, and the most approved machinery for mining, also a porta-church for expanding the Methodist religion. A few more persons answering the above character will be received into the association if application is made soon. $300 is the price of a share, which entitles the holder to his voyage, a share in the property of the association, and the provisions for 18 months. Now, in those days, back in New York, you could also buy a ticket for about $75 to $125 to get to California via Cape Horn. This was a little higher. That's why it took them so long to get fully outfitted with the people. And because of their high standards, they only got 76 Methodists. But you'll hear more about that. Agreeable companions and trustworthy partners, this association offers peculiar inducements. All applicants, of course, were reviewed by the committee as to their character and health. Eventually, the association permitted some 36 non-Methodist members to join the contingent of 76 Methodists and 19 officers and sailors with mining tools. Alcohol aboard the ship was for medicinal purposes only, but that changed. However, it be noted in Farrell's log, the alcohol became more available at times of celebration during the voyage, which became quite often. June 26, friends and family members came to Judd's Wharf, and some boarded the ship to bid their loved ones farewell. It sailed in the afternoon, and by dark, the entire continent was gone as they were deep at sea. Many of these people had never been to sea, which became even more onerous as they hit Cape Horn. It was an 18,000-mile voyage round the Cape to here. Took them 176 days, of which 26 were spent down in Chile and other places, which you'll hear about too, because that was important as stops for reprovisioning. So, it started out, everything was fine for a few days only, until the California-bound ship celebrated national holidays. And they had a meeting on the quarterdeck on the evening of July 3rd to plan activities for celebrating Independence Day. At 6 a.m., the day of the ushered in with a grand salute of small arms, no anvils, which seemed to do the heart of every true American good. And Captain Clark reported as chairman of the Committee on Refreshments that there was plenty of brandy, port wine, and lemonade, with port wine for the celebrations. This presumably was for drinking the toasts. However, this got carried away as one could only begin. The actual plan for the voyage was church services several times a week, no drinking, no cussing, no gambling, no smoking, and no fooling around with women. That changed, especially since they had, you got to remember, the extra 26 people that didn't join in with this high standard. They brought the rest of the ship down. July 5th, the passengers witnessed the first death of a fellow Argonaut after only 9 days at sea. In a dead calm around noon, Captain Shepard lowered all the flaps, all of the sails, and permitted the people to go swimming round the ship. It was a calm day. Charles M. Griffiths, one of those who went swimming, he went down on a rope and swam toward the boat and was a short distance away, but unable to hold on. He's never been seen since. That was the first. Total on the voyage were 3 people had died, but there was one wonderful, miraculous thing going around Cape Horn. The captain's wife gave birth to a little baby girl. So that was it. During the 178-day voyage, the Arkansas stopped for 26 days in the port of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and Telecalom, Chile, to provide the passengers much needed rest. And Farrell noted after they left the ship, there was extensive gambling, and that was only the beginning. In his log, he talked about the Chilean women, and he wrote in, and it's a little interesting, the women is passionately fond of Americans. They will come out on the street and coax them in to stay with them. The most of our company took them a wife while in port. Many of these guys were married, but, you know, it's a long voyage, and one has to think of priorities. And then when they got round Cape Horn, they were hit by an intense storm in October that almost took the ship down. They were even thinking of cutting the masts down. The entire starboard side was flooded, and they had conscripted everybody on the ship to help save the ship. They were all working for the sailors. When the Arkansas finally started northbound, many of the ship's passengers had need of the doctor aboard. After stopping, of course, in Chile, you can only begin to imagine. When the Arkansas dropped anchor close to Bird Island in San Francisco Bay, later becoming Alcatrazes and finally Alcatraz, the captain, late in the afternoon on December 19th, 1849, wanted to take 11 men, and they went in a longboat over to San Francisco to pre-set up for going through customs next day and pick up mail. Coming back, it was a drizzly afternoon in December. They had a hell of a time finding the ship. When they did, it was sinking. It had swung on anchor and broke its boards on the change of current they didn't know about. So everybody was required to help pump the ship dry. The next day, the captain tried to get a tugboat. The guy wanted $5,500 to tow them to San Francisco. He finally got 3 small tugs and paid $1,300, and they towed them over to where? Right here. And guess what? The ship is under where we're standing. This direction. It's been there all these days. So anyway, the upshot is, while the Methodist passengers professed strict religious morals prior to the departure from New York, little time passed before their resistance eroded. Temperance succumbed. Drinking, partying, gambling, and the lust for females was cultivated and highlight during the many stops in Brazil and Chile. By the time the Arkansas arrived in San Francisco, the passengers, captain, and crew were most qualified to undertake the hardships of survival in the gold fields of California. So what started out with high standards ended up as a full-on clamper ship here. Now, where are all those? Who's got where? Nope. I have, where's my little, there they are. This is what you want to see. There wasn't this building next door. That's only in the recent couple of years. This is what it said on the side of the, right, if you could see it, behind the scene here, the old ship saloon, Henry Clee, proprietor. Now that goes back and requires you to know that this is the oldest continuous operating bar in San Francisco. And like the 700 ships that came into San Francisco, many of them are buried under the street. This just shows but a few. This is the one we're standing next to, and that's how she is oriented. Like I said, this way. One of the interesting things is, after it was a hotel in the very first year, and this was all landfill here, they had an extremely high king tide. And you can only imagine the rooms with the people enjoying themselves being floated up and out of the mud in about 2 or 3 in the morning. So that caused quite a stir. An interesting one. Moving on, this is the pin of the day that was created for this very moment. And I'm going to read you the plaque over here. The Old Ship Saloon, following a long 178-day voyage from New York via Cape Horn in 1849, the sailing ship Arkansas was purposely grounded here on the edge of the Barbary coast. Arkansas carried the group of 76 Methodists and her 112 passengers, all bound for the gold fields or the Methodist propagation. In 1851, an entrepreneur who bought the ship from the captain. Now you have to realize everybody was supposed to stay together for 18 months. No way, and that was very typical of the Argonaut ships. They came to San Francisco and everybody scattered. And he ended up with the ship, but he sold it to an entrepreneur who cut a hole in the bow, called it the Old Ship Saloon. Its colorful history has included that of a seaman's boarding house, the pains and pleasures of shanghaied men to the ladies, yet the old ship has never lost its main attraction, that of a first-rate saloon. Dedicated March 23rd, 6007 by Capitalus Redivivus Yerba Buena number 1. That was 2002. Any questions?
What's in the brethren?
And so recorded. Now, to end this, I would like the noble grand humbug to stand up here and accept a token for his wonderful leadership for this year.
Oh, wow. Wow.
You said you were looking for a picture. This is a historical, very limited lithograph from the early days of San Francisco. And it doesn't show the Old Ship Saloon, but you can only imagine what it was like. Now, where's Kai?
I'm right here.
Kai, you don't get quite the same, but I have another one for you as a presento. And both of you gentlemen are doing exceptionally well.
Thank you, sir.
And I think we're all very fortunate to have such extreme good leadership, not only now, but into the future.
Here, here.
Here, here. So, what say, brethren?
So recorded.
And I think we can now press on to the next bar.
There we are.
This is the plaque for the Hodling building. This building right here survived the earthquake and fire of 1906. This building goes back to 1866. The reason it got saved was because this building was filled with hundreds of thousands of gallons of whiskey in barrels. 2 stories. The owner either convinced the firefighters that if they dynamited this building to create a fire break like they were doing all over downtown San Francisco, all that whiskey inside would just make the fire a lot worse. But of course, in Clamperdom, there's always a second story, right? And this one is that he bribed the firefighters with the whiskey to save his building. Whichever, it's still here. It's now a clothing store. This plaque was put up on March 28, 1992 by Yerba Buena number 1. What say the brethren? And it reads, built in 1866 and occupied by A.R. Hodling, or Hotaling, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, and company. This building housed the largest liquor repository on the West Coast and survived the 1906 earthquake and fire due to a mile-long fire hose laid from Fisherman's Wharf over Telegraph Hill by the U.S. Navy. This prompted the famous doggerel by Charles Field, if, as they say, God spanked the town for being over frisky, why'd he burn the churches down and save Hodling's whiskey? Hodling whiskey is still made by Anchor, our wonderful local brand, and I've heard they get the recipe pretty close to the original. And this, the alley's namesake is Hodling Alley. It's one block alley right here. And you notice the wavy line in the pavement? That's not because this was installed by clampers. That's to show this is where the water line came to in 1849. You're literally standing on the beach as it was then. At the very end of the block, there's a bar on the right-hand side, and if you go down the basement, you can see the original seawall. These are hitching posts. They're original hitching posts from the 1800s. The city has a tremendous amount of these in storage, and they can sometimes be leased for special events. This whole neighborhood is basically from the 1850s to the 1870s. Probably the most historic neighborhood in the city, and it was all saved due to this whiskey warehouse.
Here, here.
What say the brethren?
Satisfactory!
Mike Easy here. I'm going to show you how to clean a plaque for YB1. This is the Holtling building. Is that what that's pronounced? Hoteling. There we go. So when you're cleaning a plaque, your first step, there's a lot of crud that's on here. You want to use a really mild cleaner but does an effective job, Simple Green. You just douse this bad boy like this. You give her a good scrubbing right here. You don't want to use any metal brushes because otherwise you're going to damage the back of the plaque or anything on the plaque, because metal will abrade other metal. This had a little bit of graffiti that was wiped off over here. That usually takes a little bit more effort to get off. You can already see all the dirt dripping off of it. So you do your first cleaning, then you wash it off and see where you're at, see if there's any areas that really need to get a little TLC on there. I have a whole bucket of supplies when I go out cleaning. You can already see all the dirt and stuff that's coming off. This is just the start, because now you can see how it's not as vibrant as it usually is there. So you're going to have to use a little bit of a 400 grit sandpaper on that. And it has to be 400 grit, because otherwise you're going to do a lot of damage on the plaque. And that's the last thing you want to do.
Wet and dry.
Wet and dry. Works perfect on there. This is the best cleaning I've ever done with the commentary.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, yeah.
But don't fuck it up. I smell humbug.
Get the fuck out of here. So you have to make sure when you're sanding you don't touch any of the background, because if you scrape that it makes it look really bad. And that's a big no-no. We want to preserve these plaques, make them look beautiful for the next generation.
Here. This is probably the first time this has ever been cleaned since '92.
It could be. Yeah, the patina looks like it from other plaques I've cleaned.
10 years ago in Buena,
And this kind of makes it so when people are walking by, it pops out a little bit more, and you know, someone coming by is going to learn a little bit of history, which is why we're clampers, right? This one's actually really well preserved because most of the lettering, there's no chipping on it. And a lot of even plaques at this age, they get chipped. People go along and they hit them with stuff, and it's really not good. This is a beautiful plaque though. They didn't use blue tape though along the edge. It's a little rough. You see how the border really pops out? That's what really makes the plaque look nice and clean. Don't use power tools when you do this, or you'll damage the plaque.
Yeah, Phil.
Phil is my mentor, and he was well-intentioned on that picture, if anyone knows what we're talking about. You always got to make sure the Clampus Vitus is the best polished part on the plaque. This wouldn't be here without YB1. Wash it off to see where we're at. Come on, guys, we're on a budget here. So then you have to go back over on the rough spots, clean it up a bit.
Commemorates the Eureka lodgings that stood on this site in the 1800s. This was the residence of Emperor Norton. He had a room. Here he is.
Hail Norton.
Hail Norton.
Get off your plaque.
He had a room that was about 8 foot by 10 foot, paid 50 cents a day rent. Sometimes you go next door to another hotel to read the newspapers, and then head to Portsmouth Square to hang out. Sometimes you end up at the Mechanics Institute to write his proclamations. So this was the site of that boarding house. Later on it would become a shrimp factory, part of the Salvation Army. All kinds of different things were on this site. We have never been able to find a picture of the Eureka Lodgings boarding house on this site. So maybe someday we will. The plaque was placed here by ex-Noble Grand Humbug John Archer Flynn on March 25th, 2016, clamp year 6021. Why don't you talk a little bit about how it got here?
Yeah. Well, my wife and I were kind of bored one weekend, and we decided to take, what was the name of the magical...
Emperor Norton's Fantastic San Francisco Time Machine.
Absolutely. So we took that tour, and we joined up on, was our Union Square, and we went around to several of the buildings, and Joe here had a presence about him that seemed familiar to me. A little bit of the archaic, the absurd, and willing to tell a lie creatively. And as we came up here, you know, we got to the gate because it was a Saturday, and he was talking about the Eureka lodgings, and I was about to become the humbug. And while he was talking, I go, I think that man's a clamper. And then, so I just stood in the back and I gave him the salute. I gave him the raised fist, and he looked at me, and he raised his. And from then on, we were best friends. We were brothers. So I talked to him about this, and he told me about who owned this place. And I needed a plaque for my spring doings. And it took 2 years going back and forth with the bank. Which was the bank then, Elise?
Well, no, it's actually the building on the corner of the Empire Group.
Empire Group. And back and forth, and they never responded to me very well. But then they did when I told them the story of Emperor Norton coming from South Africa, because the president of that group is from South Africa. And the minute he heard that, he goes, well, we got to do this. Then he gave me access, they gave us permission, and we came in to do this. My erectionist that year was Doug Luna.
What that year? You're
Erectionist.
Brother Tattoo.
Yes. It was 5 years ago when I had an erection. Get your minds out of the gutter. So we had a supply of granite rather than using, a metal plaque, and we've never done one done in the floor. And they were quite happy to put one down here and designate it as such. So Doug and Crimp and Corey and somebody else, a couple of guys, I think Frank was here? Bobby was here. You were here. So we came here on a Saturday morning at 7, and Doug goes, you know what? We're just going to smash out that concrete. We'll pull it up, mix up a bag of concrete, put it down, place it, smooth it off. We'll be out of here by 9:30 tops. We'll go next door for dim sum. Sounds like a great idea. We were all in on it. And then we started to chip into it. All of the concrete here has gunite in it. Little rubber plasticized bits that bind together so we couldn't crack it out. We had to get a jackhammer and several drills and drill 600 holes in one square and then chip it out by hand with a hammer and a chisel one by one. Well, we started mixing the concrete at 5 o'clock that evening. The entire time, Doug Luna was cursing me a blue streak. He cursed my parents, my lineage, my heritage. He cursed everything about me. And and I bless him. He should. It was rough work, but then we came back and we had we had to do it on a weekday because they closed this park on a weekend. I was very lucky that they opened it for us today. So we came in and we consecrated the plaque on, I think it was a Thursday.
I think so.
I think it was a Thursday, and we put it down at 10:01 actually. 11:01. Because then it was in second quarter, third phase, Sagittarius rising, and get the fuck out of here. So then I christened it with Bushmills. We cleaned it up, took a bunch of pictures, and a bunch of us went next door for the dim sum dinner lunch that we never had before. But this was my first plaque, and it was because of Joe. And if it wasn't for him, this plaque wouldn't be here. My second plaque, which we're not going to see today, because it's 300 miles north, was because of Kai. So it is because of my friendships with the Brotherhood that I got these things. That's where it comes from. Everybody here knows a bit about some piece of archaic history that should be remembered. So those of you who are about to become humbug, remember all of those things, because all of that stuff is important. If we don't remember it, it's lost forever.
Satisfactory!
Thank you all.
Former site of Eureka Lodgings, residence of Emperor Norton. On this site stood the Eureka Lodgings, a boarding house catering to tradesmen and transients. His most famous resident, Joshua Abraham Norton, 1818 to 1880, began living here in 1863 and remained for the next 17 years. Coming from South Africa in 1849, Norton soon amassed a large fortune. By the late 1850s, he lost everything from a poor investment in rice. And on September 17, 1859, Norton declared himself Emperor of the United States, later adding Protector of Mexico. The U.S. Census of 1870 showed his residence as the Eureka Lodgings and listed his occupation as Emperor. Where that leaves out, it says that the reason he can't vote is because he's insane. On January 8, 1880, Emperor Norton collapsed and died at the corner of California and DuPont, now Grant Streets. His funeral was attended by more than 30,000 mourners. He is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Colma. Dedicated March 25, 2016. Clamp year 6021. Yerba Buena Lodge number 1. E. Clampus Vitus. Credo quia absurdum.
What say the brothers?
Satisfactory!
This plaque tells the story of Bummer and Lazarus, the two most famous dogs who ever lived in San Francisco. Bummer came first, and one day he saw a couple dogs get into a dog fight. They were street dogs, like a lot of the dogs were in those days. He nursed the other dog back to health. They became friends for the rest of their lives. They were Bummer and Lazarus, San Francisco's most famous dogs. They had the reign of the city. They could go anywhere they wanted to. They were especially liked by the merchants around here because they had a real talent for catching rats. The city was teeming with rats. They caught over 10,000 of them in their lifetimes. Eventually, Lazarus would die first. He was poisoned. And they had a funeral for him that was huge. There's actually an etching of the emperor as a pope doing the funeral, and somebody's waving a rat over his head.
Oh, God.
Gordon Jump.
Yeah, Edward Jump did that lithograph, and that's what is used on here. For the picture of Bummer and Lazarus is another Edward Jump lithograph, and it's called The Three Bummers, because a lot of people associate Bummer and Lazarus with Emperor Norton. They may have followed him around, but they were never his dogs. They were the dogs of the people. Bummer would eventually die, and they had a big funeral for him too. Both the dogs were taxidermied after they died. They were in a bar about a block from here at 425 Sansom Street. Jim, what was the name of the bar? Anyway.
It's lost to history.
Lost to history, the Lost to the History bar. And it was thought that they originally burned up in the earthquake and fire of 1906. But then we came across a newspaper story a few years ago from 1910 showing they were donated to the Golden Gate Park Museum, which is now the DeYoung. There's another story from around that time that said that they were going to be sent out to be re-taxidermied. Got in contact with the DeYoung Museum, got to go through their inventories for that year, I think it was 1912, only to discover the dogs had been destroyed. They were filled with bugs and could not be saved. And so now, our great emperor is going to read the plaque.
One more little footnote. You'll note that this dog is in the perfect position to be able to read the plaque. Why is the plaque placed here at this height? So that dogs can read it, obviously, not people. And here's their wording. Bummer and Lazarus. Bummer and Lazarus were two stray dogs who roamed this part of San Francisco in the 1860s. Their devotion to each other endeared them to the citizenry and the newspapers. Reporters, where does that go? Yeah, reporters and I got to get down to your dog height.
Who wrote this thing?
Yes, reporters and their joint adventures, whether stealing a bone from another dog, uncovering a nest of rats, as you mentioned, or stopping a runaway horse. I didn't know that. Though authorities destroyed other strays on site, the city permitted these two to run free. Indeed, they were welcomed regular customers at popular eating and drinking establishments. On Montgomery Street, contrary to common belief, they were not Emperor Norton's dogs.
That's right.
They belonged to no one person. They belonged to San Francisco. When Lazarus died in October of 1863, followed by Bummer in November of 1865, a reporter from the Bulletin described them thus: two dogs with but a single bark, two tails that wagged as one. And it was placed March 23rd, 4992. Is that right?
Yeah, 1987.
Okay. E Clampus Vitus.
Brothers, welcome to the Comstock Saloon, my personal favorite saloon in what was the Barbary Coast Vice District. Behind us is Pacific Street, the heart of the Barbary Coast, the Vice District of San Francisco since the gold rush up until around the 1920s when Prohibition kicked in. This bar was opened in 1906-07 by the Griffin brothers. They had a saloon around the corner here on Kearny Street called the Andromeda Saloon. The Andromeda Saloon went up in flames in 06. By 1906-07, this building was being built, and the Griffin brothers moved the second Andromeda Saloon in this establishment. And it remained open and popular up until Prohibition in 1920. In 1920, it started as the Andromeda Cafe, but they were still serving spirituous liquors to patrons that they knew. After Prohibition was over in 1933, it opened up as the Service Club, and then eventually so in the 40s and 50s, and eventually Service Club Sam's. And when the Barbary Coast experienced a new lease on life during World War II, and all servicemen came down to this area, all the servicemen looking for liquor and women, and they found them here. And by the 1960s, the owners sold to Filipino owners, there was a Filipino community around the corner down here on Kearny. They painted over the wood and called it La Planta Club. And it was a little bit of a rough crowd in there, from what I'm told. Apparently one guy walked around with a big knife under his thing, and anyone that messed with him, he would present the knife. By the 1970s, two guys, one guy's name's Gillen, I can't remember the other gentleman, bought the La Planta Club, restored the place. They took off the paint off the wood. They restored the wainscoting and the floor and everything, and they ran it until January of 1986, when Clampus brother Alan Paul opened this as the San Francisco Brewing Company, which was the first microbrewery in San Francisco since repeal, and thus the sign. Brother Jim Tanner had this plaque mounted in 2003. And in 2009, Allen sold it. They removed all the brewing equipment, and it became the Comstock Saloon. The owners are very conscious of the history of this place, and inside it's gorgeous. There, at the base of the bar, beneath the bar rail, is a urination trench, to put it nicely, and that is where the male patrons would relieve themselves.
God, I wish I was open now.
And it's been closed since the pandemic, yet hopefully they'll be open soon. Beautiful interior, run by fantastic mixologists and bartenders, and a great room inside. You feel good being in this room.
And it's got those big banana leaf things that are just like raffles.
It's got Walla Walla air fans, which go vertically instead of horizontally, and that's something to look at.
And right behind here is where they had the great big brewing tub. You could see everything happening right through here. What's behind it?
And in the 1920s, that was an old barber shop, and the tile floor, the blue and white tile floor, puts you in the mind of an old barber shop.